We've got about 10 minutes, and I'll do 2 questions at a time. If people come to a microphone, we'll put 2 together, two quick questions, get the panel to reflect on those, and do a couple more over here, and we'll be done. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Natalia Linu from UNDP. Thank you. It has been a really wonderful panel. My question is, what is your honest opinion of the term planetary health? Can that help us mobilize sort of support? And also to your point, Courtney, about setting targets, is it better to say we as a community will support the climate change work and the pollution work, like set a few targets? I mean, the interests are really diverse in this room.
Great question.
How do you
advise?
Hi, Federico from Colombia. I recently moved to Canada, and something that I find very scary is that in Colombia we feel that Canadians do things well and they're super green. So when a mining company comes to Colombia, it's a Canadian company, this is going to be fine. So I just have questions about how are you networking with organizations in South America that are dealing with the same issues but with less organized controls, and it's very hard to deal with that in those contexts. Thank you.
Okay. Let's come over here and then we'll go to the panel. Okay, I'll ask Sam to give us a quick summary of that on the first question. Let's go over here, and then we'll go to the panel. Go ahead.
First off, thank you so much to Ariel for your message. I'm also an Indigenous woman, and I just really, really appreciate what you're doing and seeing you here in a setting like this. I'm Lauren from Cornell. And I was wondering if you have any advice on how to humanize climate change and connect these human implications to a history of oppression, and how to empower Indigenous communities and around the world.
Okay, panel, let me pick and choose from the questions that were answered, and let's just start. Marshall, do you want to start, and we'll just roll right down? We'll line up with you. Okay, so go the other direction. Who wants to start?
I can just start with the last question. I think that over the last 5 years, there's been a huge movement, or a shift rather, in the environmental movement, and an intersectionality of not just environmental movement focusing on just the environment and bringing in both science and human stories together. And I think that that's been happening pretty good. But there also needs to be a review and a shift of what Marshall was talking about, which is power. And how do we shift the dynamics of power and start to create forms of equity? We talk a lot of rhetoric about that, but the reality is that Indigenous people still lack access to resources, and most importantly, lack access to power. Even within the UNFCCC climate negotiations, Indigenous peoples, although we are sort of recognized as important players in developing climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies, we have no seat at the table. We have no power other than lobbying state leaders that have the power. And so we have to move towards fundamentally shifting how Indigenous people are able to access resources and sit in positions of having meaningful impact on decisions. We talk about science influencing policy, but Indigenous peoples and Indigenous knowledge also needs to be at the table with them. And we need to empower communities to not only understand that, but it's hard. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of years of systemic and institutional oppression and marginalizations, attempted erasure of culture and identity through residential and boarding schools in Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries where we saw this attempted erasure and assimilation into our society. And so there's a lot of undoing that has to happen with that. And there's a lot of people that need to wake up. They wake up.
Courtney, do you want to take a shot?
Sure. So I personally think the term planetary health is really useful. I think it's something that people understand intuitively, and I think that that helps. And I suppose the only thing would be to proceed into this space with some humility. That's what I didn't say. There's a lot of people who have been in this space for decades. Trevor Hancock in Canada says that the environmental movement has been doing the work of public health for decades, and we need to acknowledge that. They've been doing our job. So as we move in, we can't steamroller in. We have to go, we have to assess, we have to see what people have to say. Same thing with the Indigenous peoples who have been doing the work of public health for millennia, really. And so I think the planetary health term is useful. In terms of targets, I think that a lot of it is going to be local. But what I think we need to get much better at is replicating wins. So if something works here, let's communicate and do the same thing here and here and here and here, much like what Mothers Out Front is doing. I think coal's a really good target. I really think we need to look at fracking. The evidence base has come along, and unfortunately none of it's good. And we need to be interacting with that.
That leads to you, Kelsey.
So I also think that the planetary health frame is a very useful one, and I also think it is important to localize. So, for example, when we're working on climate change, if we're talking to mothers, working with mothers in Hampton Roads, Virginia, we're talking about sea level rise. Because that's what they're experiencing. When we're talking to mothers in Southside Williamsburg, where we have a partnership with El Puente, we're talking about asthma. When we're talking to mothers in Boston, we're talking about gas leaks. So in the overall frame, yes, is climate change. And so you can use an overall frame of planetary health, but just being very cognizant on who your audience is, who you're trying to engage, and how you make this set of issues speak to them and connect it with their personal experience, I think is very important.
Marshall, closing the panel.
Yeah, I guess we all think planetary health is good, right? Good. Right? Yeah. Okay, good. That's settled. No, I think it's important to this may seem a little tangential, but I think it's important to recognize something. An old friend, Tom Hayden, who is active in the anti-war movement, once said, "Change is slow except when it's fast." We're in a fast moment right now, certainly in this country, and I think in much of the world. There is a fluidity in public institutions, in the reaction to challenges that are unlike those we've experienced before, certainly in this country, from the administration. And the response, whether it's 7,000 indivisible groups or students at the Kennedy School put together a resistance school and had a session last week attended by 40,000 people online, there is a moment right now to engage. And I think that people are ready to engage, but I think they are desperate to figure out how and to find the pathways. And I think the challenge for those of us that see where change needs to go is to create those pathways and to extend those invitations and to come up with those approaches. And whenever we were designing campaigns, we always thought there were three elements. You have to have the story. That's why it matters, why we care. That's the humanizing. That's the whole values part. But we also have to have the strategy. What's our power strategy? How are we going to influence these targets that we have? Is it civil disobedience? Is it political? What is it? And thirdly, how do we organize ourselves to do it? And that is not minimal. That's significant, because how we organize ourselves determines whether we have the venues within which to strategize, and to strategize with each other. Not just in isolated little pockets here and there, but creativity and strategy comes from a merging of different kinds of perspectives and experience. And so I think that's where the challenge lies. It's time to get going on that, I think.
Maybe the Planetary Health Alliance will have a session soon on the urgency of now and more of what can be done and how to do it. This has been a terrific panel, and we thank all four of you very much for your great participation. Dan?